everybody, and welcome to PGS Moving Image. I'm your host, RM, and of course, we have with us tonight Catherine Cooke. Catherine, how are you today?
Good.
I'm so glad you're here, Catherine, because you and I have had such a great time reviewing award ceremonies this year. We have some other award ceremonies coming up this month in February, the BAFTAs, as well as I think it's the SAG Awards. We watched the Golden Globes together, and that was such a fun and exciting night. And I am only just watching these films, which were nominated and received awards in some cases. Certainly, no film can get more prestigious award, I guess, than Anatomy of a Fall, which got the Palme d'Or last year. It caused quite a bit of stir and attention at Cannes, and certainly a lot of people have talked about it. And it really has done, I think, in a sense, in regards to people watching it pretty well. I don't know how much money it's made at the box office, but it has had a lot of chatter. But I think what's really interesting is, the approach that they took with this particular film. And both you and I have seen the film, and I know I have a lot to say about it. Um, and certainly I can see personally why I felt it did deserve to win the Palme d'Or last year. And here we are talking about a film called Anatomy of a Fall. Now, Catherine, what did you heard about this film? It's not sharing the right way. What had you heard about Anatomy of a Fall um, over the last year, and what did you think about it when you went to see it?
I hadn't heard much of anything other than that it won the award at Cannes, and then I finally saw it, and I thought it was all right. I don't think it's as good as everybody's been saying, but I think I've seen better films this year. But it was good. I just felt that the way it's structured, the fact that the prosecutor's first nitpick, the first thing that he chooses to bring up in the trial is a nitpick about the nature of the conversation she was having during this interview on the day. I'm like, okay, you just told me you have no faith in your expert who's analyzing the titular anatomy of the fall, so the verdict, therefore, is obvious of what it's going to be. Because you have an unreliable star witness, you have two different experts in the form of expert shot. It's like, so to me, it wasn't really a stretch as to what the outcome was going to be. And as the story starts to unfold, as you're seeing a combination of flashbacks and the interludes between trial days, it seemed obvious to me that there was really no motive for it to be a murder, or at least not strong enough. And I thought the prosecutor at one point unintentionally made an argument for acquittal. And it's like, and the scenes were good. They're dramatic. I did feel it over 2.5 hours is a bit long. And maybe that's because it just seemed, again, so obvious to me so early on what the outcome was going to be. And it's funny because the actress there, Sandra Huller, she says that during filming, she asked the director, well, did she do it? Which is like the tagline of the movie. She's like, are you kidding? I can't tell you that. But when you watch it, especially the final scene, I thought it was really obvious what the truth of the matter was. So maybe she was saying that. I get why she might have asked that during filming, because obviously what you're filming is going to be different than what you get out of the final cut. But the performances were very good. Sandra Huller was great. Definitely a deserving Oscar nomination for her. Also deserving for the director, because it was a very well directed movie. I'd say that I don't have his name handy, but the child actor is one of the best child actors I've seen in a long time, playing the son, and I thought he was really good and the real standout in the film. But it's not that it was bad or anything. It's that, okay, once I saw it, it's like, I've seen it. I don't really feel an urge to watch it again. I gave it like 3.5 stars out of 5. If the mystery had been a bit more, if it didn't seem as obvious to me what was going on, maybe I'd give it a 4, or possibly as high. But it also, it's the tone is very much like this slow and deliberate thing. And you don't have these super dramatic moments per se. Like there's one flashback scene of a big argument between, the husband and the wife, but it's mostly a calm argument. And then when it turns to being a bit angrier, they do this clever thing where they pull away back to the courtroom, so you don't, because I like how the director's playing around with how much she's choosing to show you. Like the flashbacks, you're seeing what actually happened, but then anytime it cuts back in the middle of the flashback to the courtroom, you know that, okay, now this is the part where it's open to interpretation. So I thought that was really clever. But I just also thought that because to me it was a bit obvious what the outcome was going to be and what the truth of the matter was, it didn't grab me as much as it has a lot of other people.
Yeah, this is such a good point, Catherine. And I think that when when I first heard about Anatomy of a Fall, I had thought that it was a story about a woman falling. And so I was surprised that it was a woman who was essentially being accused of her husband's murder and or death, let's say wrongful death. And that was something that I didn't feel was entirely clear, because I think one of the first mistakes they made was that they made the ruling of the death as being inconclusive. And Catherine, I think one of the strongest things would have been is if the prosecutors had said that he died from foul play or something like that. But when it's inconclusive like this, it leads up for so much interpretation, even the notion that they could be wrong, that, it could have been a horrible accident, all sorts of things. My first thought was it's got to be an accident because he's doing construction on the house. So of course he had a fall. We see people do this, they fall off ladders. It's not so far fetched. I think it would have been very different situation if, you know, not just that the inconclusiveness of the autopsy was an issue, but if the way that he was killed was something that was very suspicious. This didn't seem like a suspicious incident to you. Did it seem suspicious, Catherine?
I mean, other than the fact that at the autopsy they mentioned that the particular injury would not have been caused by the fall itself, like they say he had to have hit something or been hit in advance, and that's something the prosecutor tries to latch onto. But I noticed, to your point about it, them saying it's inconclusive, but throughout the trial, which again, it's not yet been decided whether or not she's guilty or that he was even murdered, but they keep referring to him as victim. And it's like, well, you don't know if he was murdered yet, so you can't really say he's a victim of anything if it was just an accident. Are we allowed to talk spoilers?
Yes, we are going to be talking spoilers, everybody. Yes, we can. Let me just put up a spoiler banner for let me just put in the name of the movie. I'll just put in spoilers. Spoilers. Okay, save. And it's at the bottom. Guys, we will be talking spoilers here. Just so you know, we're going to be talking spoilers for Anatomy of a Fall and for American Fiction. Go ahead.
So in the movie, you find out that one of the other possibilities besides murder or accident is possibly suicide. And they don't explicitly say it, but they do hint at it, like with the boy recalling a scene when his father was going with him to go to the veterinarian with the dog, and he's trying to prep his son for the possibility that the dog might die. But you could tell that the way he's talking to his son, that he's not really talking about the dog. Like it's almost like he's talking about himself. And you could see during the big argument scene between the husband and the wife that he does feel really strained. And she's like, look, the only thing I'm guilty of is I happened to become successful when we moved out here. You thought this was going to be great for you, but no, you moved into a fixer-upper, took me away from my friends and all this type of stuff. And granted, life wasn't great in Germany, but we came out here anyway. And you're the one who wanted this distraction, and yet this is a big construction project for you. So it's not my fault that I happened to find a way to be successful and you haven't. And you could tell that he's kind of upset about that she's more successful than he is, but that he's also depressed, and it's really been getting to him. And so it's like, okay, they make a good case that it didn't seem like you would have just fallen out the window given where the construction was going on versus because it was an A-frame roof, and given how small the window in particular that was open versus the side he was working on, it's like, okay, I could buy that people are curious as to whether, like, did he step back, like what happened? But they do imply that it's suicide. And again, they never tell you exactly explicitly what it is, but that seemed logical. Whereas the prosecutor, he says, oh, you must have murdered him because you were willingly cheating on your husband because you blamed him for your son's accident that caused him to be, legally blind. And you were not only cheating on him, but you were literally telling him to his face that you were cheating on him to hurt him. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense that she's upset in doing that. But the fact that the prosecutor also concedes that, well, you're still cheating on him potentially now, but now you're not telling it to his face anymore. Well, that means she doesn't hate him as much. So wouldn't it be more logical that if she was going to kill him, that she would have done it years ago, like around the time that the son had the accident instead of now, years later? Like, even if the prosecutor was right and she did invite this student to interview here because she was flirting with her, trying to make the husband jealous, which frankly didn't seem to be the case because the wife, she wasn't bothered by the noise. The student was bothered by all the noise when the husband was blasting the radio, but the wife wasn't. She's like, multiple times she says, oh, we can just go to town and do this if you want. And so it's like, so it might be suicide, but it's like the prosecutors seem to make the case that it's really not murder. She's kind of gotten over her anger towards him for any fault that he may have had for what happened to their son. And so it's like, well, then what? And that's why I was having a hard time understanding. It's like, I don't see any real motive for murder here, and they didn't really push hard enough in the movie, I felt, at getting you to really think that it could go either way. It seemed too obvious that no, this is not a murder. Could be a suicide, but it could also be an accident. Like, even when you watch the prosecution expert's digital recreation of how she murdered him, if you look at the animation, how she's leaning all the way over to push him over, if you follow that animation through to its logical conclusion, as he would start falling over, his lower torso and his legs would kick her up because she's leaning over. She would have gone over the balcony with him. So it makes no sense. Whereas the defense's expert concedes the possibility that, well, it could have happened the other way, which means she's being a little more honest. So with things like that, and the way the prosecutor's being so nitpicky, he literally introduces her novels into the books, like, or into the trial. It's like, it's so obvious what's going to happen at the outcome of what the verdict is going to be at this point that you're literally as close to grasping at straws as you can. So to me, it was running out of steam a bit too early, because it's like, come on, nobody is going to buy this crap that the prosecutor's trying to sell.
Yeah, I agree with all of that 100%. And certainly some of the things that I thought was very strange was almost as if the prosecutors are trying to catch the mother and son in a lie when we knew that they were not lying. They didn't lie about anything here during this interrogation. And it was that was also awkward. The interrogation scenes, not of the mother, but mostly the son, felt very awkward. And there was nothing creepier than that woman who had to stay with the son so that the mother and son weren't talking, because she didn't get bail, but they allowed her to stay at home. So there's this stranger, Catherine, eavesdropping on what you're doing for a court hearing. And it's a year later, right, Catherine? It was a year later that the
Yeah, and on one of the days when she's, having to stay with him, they go on a walk, and they get home to find that the authorities are trying to recreate the fall with a dummy. And I'm like, they didn't tell, like, because the trial judges were concerned that, understandably so, that if she were allowed to live at home with her son, that she would coach her son, or shower him with love and affection, even if she doesn't coach him, as a way to win her over to her side. But it's like, well, something that would equally inhibit any testimony is if you don't tell them that, oh, by the way, we're going to bring authorities over here and recreate this. Maybe you should go to town that day. But instead they walk right into it. And the fact that the court ordered, a babysitter, if you want to call her that, was not told that, by the way, we're going to do this today, because that's obviously going to be traumatizing for the kid and really taint his testimony. He was like, I couldn't believe, I was like, I can't believe that this is, they're having these problems, that these types of things are happening. But,
Yeah, and I do want to say hi to some of the people who are here. I do want to say hello to Efren Guzman. Hi, Efren. Hope you are well this evening. Penny says that she saw Anatomy of a Fall Wednesday and she gave it a 3 out of 5. And hi, Penny. So good to see you here. Ryan Landis is here. Happy Friday. Well, happy Friday to you. And Lorena Creole. Hey, Lorena, how are you? Says happy Friday, everyone. A performing artist says good evening, y'all. Where to watch the movie? I watched it on Apple TV. And I think you can get it on Prime Video as well. But thank you for stopping by, Efren. Tim's Talk is here. Hey, Tim, hope you are well. And Darth Plato. Hey, Darth Plato. So good to see you. Also, Joey Johnson is here. Joey, such a pleasure to see you here tonight. And something else that I think is really interesting about this. Oh, and thank you so much. So glad you like Masters of the Air, Joey. You guys are the best. You all are so wonderful. I wondered about the notion of the taping. This interview that she had with this girl was no different than any other interview you conduct with somebody. It wasn't anything special. But, kind of like going through the husband's recordings, whether he recorded stuff or not, there was absolutely nothing suspicious in his recordings. It looked like just an ordinary discussion that two people would have a couple, regardless of, whether it's two men or two women or a man and a woman, that is the exact same conversations that everybody has with their significant other. I want you to pick up more slack. And the other person says, well, I'm doing as much as I can. This was very typical and quite typical of a couple that cares a lot about one another. There was no like conversation of divorce. There was no, I hate you, nothing like that. And I found that very interesting because of how determined the prosecution was to make it seem like they had a bad relationship when they
Well,
clearly had a great one.
that's the thing that was so grating about the prosecutor, is that he's trying to nitpick at every little thing, and he's like, "Oh, you were upset at him back then for what happened to your son. That must mean you murdered him." And that's basically the one-dimensional logic he's using. And it's like, really? Or, oh, your novel, you wrote about a fall or whatever inside this book. That must mean you did it. And then the defense attorney's like, yeah, Stephen King writes about crazy shit all the time. So what? It's like, it doesn't, like, he routinely takes, historical events from Bangor, Maine, where he lives, and he inserts them into the fictional Derry, Maine, for the stories that he writes. But that doesn't mean that you're reflecting the truth. Like, authors always draw from their real life experiences and distort it. But the fact that the prosecutor is doing this, his whole strategy is just grasping at straws throughout the whole thing. And that's why it just seemed like that much longer of a movie, because it's so obvious that this guy really, the prosecutor really doesn't know what happened. It's like he's been given a mandate, convict this person, and so he's just going to do that. Whereas the defense attorney remains much more level-headed and doesn't get super passionate about it, and makes a much more logical argument. And it does essentially draw the line that the only thing she's really guilty of was managing to be a successful writer. I think they said she published another 20 books when they were out living in the countryside out here, whereas he's been just getting beat over the head, both with his decision to homeschool the son after his blindness, and his decision to get this fixer-upper of a house, which he thought was going to be a really easy thing. But you're right, there was nothing nefarious about this conversation. And yeah, you then hear once the camera cuts away, you hear somebody throw a glass and a slap. And the fact that she admits to being the one who slapped him means that she's okay. So you can read that two ways. Either one, she's being honest, because if she were guilty, she probably wouldn't say you admit to doing something violent like that. Or you could read it as her trying to make it seem like, see, I'm telling the truth. But it's still, again, couples argue every once in a while, and the fact that this argument happened the day before, and the student who came to testify is like, well, yeah, he was playing music and seemed to be agitated by what was there, but he didn't come downstairs and yell at us or argue or anything like that. So what does it matter that you had an argument the day before? It'd be one thing if the murder literally happened, like you hear it happen instead of actually seeing it, and therefore, ooh, was it murder? Was it accident? But that's not the argument. It's like, well, that was the day before, so who cares? It's like, everybody gets into a little argument every once in a while. It's not a big deal. And just, so I could just see through it so easily that, I mean, come on,
Well, also, the thing that I thought was interesting was this relationship that she had with this attorney, her defense attorney, who clearly it has, intentions of being with her. And, I think this lady, what they're most resentful to her about is that she is a fun person to be around, and she might actually just attract people. She talked about her husband, the kind of person who walks into a room and, grabs attention. I think she's the one who actually draws people to her. And, the reason why I'm thinking this is because of during the interview where she was able to kind of flip things around to ask this girl questions. As you had said before, it doesn't really matter whether she's interested in the girl or not. She was kind of charming this girl, and if that music didn't come on, that girl would have stayed there for hours and hours and hours talking to her, even after the interview was over. And then when her defense attorney is there, and then you suddenly realize, like, oh, wait a minute, he's interested in her too. It's like there are so many people who like her, but what's really funny is how much people seem to hate her when the prosecution assumes that she's guilty. Like, it's so strange that this woman who seems to have this charisma with people directly around her gets this hate from people that she doesn't even know.
Yeah, because the movie doesn't ever really show them going into town or what her relationships are like with other people in day to day, because they're living out in the, kind of in the countryside or whatever. And you could tell that they're determined to find out, what happened. But it's like, well, if it's inconclusive, the only thing you really have to figure out is what caused the injury. or the extra head injury that he had. But if you don't have any security cameras, you don't have a reliable witness, and admittedly the kid got confused, so it's like you can't really count on his testimony. Well, then what do you really have here? It's like, if you don't have the evidence, then why are you financing this big prosecution? Like, what do you really? It seems like too much of a gamble for, the local government to try and push this trial. Uh, and like you said, she's very charismatic with other people. But the fact that this is also a year later, it's like, did it really take you a year to figure this out? You could have done that, your anatomy tests at the house within a few weeks. And the fact that they sit around for they sit on this for a whole year before and the fact that there's, again, it'd be one thing if you had a huge case to prepare, but this one they don't, because like literally all they have is a few minutes of testimony from each expert, and that's it, and not very many character witnesses. Like, this shouldn't be. And the French justice system is very different from the American. It does move a lot faster. The trial, for a murder trial, especially happening within just a few days, as we see in this, is like, practically unheard of in America. So
Yeah.
why is it taking a full year to bring it? Well, that suggests because they didn't have much to go on to begin with. Because, like I said, he's just grasping at straws the whole time.
And I then as I was watching the film, I noticed that I was becoming very disgusted with the prosecution's desire to stretch and kind of fantasize about why she may or may not be guilty. And then I realized that this film is all about the Schadenfreude. They don't like that she's a successful writer. She's not French. And, technically speaking, she's someone who's emigrated into the country. And they don't like that she's come in there and is successful. And so when something bad has happened to her, they're, like, it's this behavior that where they're just, glad that she is suffering. And I tried to figure out, what the basis behind this, and it seems pretty clear that that's what it is, because, I think for them to bring such a poor case shows that, they never really thought they were going to win this. I don't think anybody thought they were going to win this, but I think, if anything, it's a commentary on people being brought to court when they don't have any business ever even being indicted at all. So perhaps that's the intention of this film, Catherine. I'm not sure, but after, kind of like thinking about it a little bit, that's how I kind of put my framework around why so many people were looking at it in a sense of importance. I have no idea whether the conviction rate of women in this situation is greater than men, or what the basis for this was, but the audiences loved this and thought this was incredible. I think that by the end, when you realize she's going to be acquitted and the son kind of like has to save the day, with this story that Catherine, it sounds very contrived. Did you believe the dog story?
I thought it was odd that he would conveniently suddenly remember this. And granted, it's because, the judge didn't want him to come to the testimony that day, which was in the son's best interest. And we see it did distress him to be there that day because he didn't want his mom home for the weekend. But the idea that, oh, I thought the dog got sick or whatever, but now if it was like they said, if dad was taking pills and the dog ate some of it and this was its reaction, I ran this experiment. And it's like, okay, so you basically almost killed your dog to find out if your mom was telling the truth. And then he gets really upset about it and tells, the court-appointed babysitter. And so she's obligated to report this. And then, but even then, for that to be like the linchpin at the end of the trial, it still is a theory as to whether or not the husband was depressed. But it's like, that doesn't matter whether or not he was depressed, because we're talking about the incident on the day. You could be depressed. You could have enemies which really want to kill you. It doesn't mean they're the ones who actually did it. So what if you find? So it was kind of odd that the fact that they're even still pursuing it at this point. Again, they're grasping at straws. And you're right. It's like the society is resenting her because she's married to a French man living in his hometown, all this kind of thing. She admits that she doesn't really speak the language very well. She repeatedly has to keep breaking into English to the annoyance of the judges and the prosecutors. And she's a much more successful author than her, French husband. And she alludes to how her time in Germany was very similar, because she mentions that she was from where she had been living in London or something like that. But then in Germany, she's like, wow, I swapped one terrible place for another. And that's what they don't like about her. It's like, oh, you're an outsider. You're not like us. You're not, it's kind of like this snobbish type thing And I think you're right. Once they found out that the results were inconclusive, even after doing their anatomies, it's like, oh, well, then the prosecution just decided to go expert shopping as an excuse to push this. But because these trials only take a few days, if you really had confidence in what your expert had to say, you'd put that front and center at the beginning. You wouldn't be nitpicking about what were you interviewing the night? Like, really? That's how you're going to start this thing? So if it had been like other legal dramas where there's like a valid question of whether or not the person's going to get off or not, combined with the valid question of whether or not they're actually guilty, that could make it a lot more compelling and engaging, because you could still have that commentary uh, of the fact that, oh, we don't know whether or not you're guilty, but we're going to put you through the ringer anyway just because you're an outsider. And that's basically what they're doing. The problem, they just wanted to be more blatant in this film by telling you right up front, pretty much, that they know she's probably not guilty. But our problem with that, from an entertainment standpoint, is that it makes a lot of the trial scenes being very droll and dragging out and being very long. And it was a bit of a long 2.5 hours to get through. And notice how they kind of skip the reading of the verdict. It's like, wait a minute. So it's like the director is aware of the fact that the viewer is already knowing what the verdict's going to be. So it's like, let's just kind of skip it. It's not really a big deal. You know, sort of like Killers of the Flower Moon. Let's just skip the verdict because we don't want to give the false impression that this is a happy ending. Whereas here, it's like, nah, we'll just skip it and go home. And then the last scene, of course, when you see her look at her husband's picture lovingly as she's getting into bed, tells you that, yeah, she didn't kill him. Like, yeah, they had their ups and downs, but she still loved him.
She definitely loved him, and, you know, this couple was about as ordinary as they come, and that's not an insult. They were not mean to one another. They, you know, she went all over the world with him, more or less. They wanted to make it work, even after the tragedy with their son. You know, for a lot of couples, that would break them up, right? A lot of couples wouldn't be together after that, but she still loves her husband and the son, and she wants to keep things, you know, together. And I get a sense, this may not be entirely true, but she makes money off of her writing. So maybe that takes priority over, you know, him maybe taking more time with the son, and she needs more time to write. So that certainly seems justifiable. I think they didn't like the notion of him kind of catering to her as well. And there probably was some, you know, I guess maybe a little bit of jealousy, professional jealousy on that side. But, you know, I like how she even says everybody knows that there's no marriage that's 50-50. You know, it's like, certainly she knew how to say what she was doing and defend herself. But certainly this is a lesson of when people are not happy necessarily for this lady and her success, and they wanted to see her suffer a little bit. So I think that, if anything, is more of an analysis of human behavior when, you know, perhaps people are not happy for you. Although it's called Anatomy of a Fall and it focuses around this court case, I think she was more a victim of public opinion than anything else. What do you think, Catherine?
Yeah. And it's interesting that, given that that's clearly the message of the movie, you don't really get to see the general public in the movie. It's
Yeah.
like you see the media frenzy outside the courtroom, and then you see that the only glimpse of the public you get are the people watching the trial there inside the courtroom, which you don't see from that angle. But they're like sitting, you know, behind the pews, just watching. And it's like, yeah, you get that the courts are all pushing this, but like, even there's this scene where she's like, "Look, I'm innocent." She tells that to her friend, to the defense attorney. He's like, "You gotta stop thinking about that and think about how it's gonna look," because, yeah, you're an outsider, and he's basically saying that, look, the fact that you're an outsider who's a very successful writer and all of that, they're gonna look at that, and you don't speak the language, that they're gonna be against you from the beginning, and that's really what this is about. But since this is not structured as a major social commentary per se, otherwise you would get the perception of the public. You would have scenes of her going out into town and how people are treating her differently or whatever. It's trying to style it as a legal drama, but because they overplay their hand so quickly, because the director's trying to tell you that, no, this is what this trial is really about, like what it's really about. Well, if you make that point too early, then it doesn't make for the most compelling viewing, even though the performances are good. So yeah, it's like, okay, I saw it. I liked it. It was decent. 3.5 out of 5.
Yeah, this could have been a little, so much more, I think, Catherine. And I think what needed to happen was that if we were going to have a sense, and as I said in the beginning of the film, I made my own decision that I thought it was an accident. So that's what I personally felt, from the tone of the film, from how we saw her at home. She seemed happy. It was a happy family. That was not unhappy people. So, as far as I'm concerned, I'd made my own judgment on it. And I think that if they wanted to force the hand or make it more controversial, they could have added a few more elements, made it more difficult for her to prove her innocence. And this sense of grasping at straws, grasping at things that have nothing to do with the case without any evidence. I think if they had thrown in some legitimate evidence, um, it could have even been a somewhat deeper film, where, let's say, unfortunately, the husband in this suicide attempt, if that had been something that really happened previously, it would have added a little bit more depth to the film. And, I think if they also had worked on the notion of perhaps her wanting to maybe leave this entire thing and not wanting to be around so much sadness, in a sense. She's sticking around because she loves him, but there's a lot of bad things happening. And that statement, as you'd said, where she says we move from one bad place to another, if she had said something, well, I can't take this anymore, then we could at least have a sense that this was not something she was going to put up with anymore, and that could have at least carried a motivation. But she actually asks him, why did we leave there? And I think that shows she considers them to be a team and together. It only strengthened her defense and weakened the prosecution's, in my opinion. So I think this could have been something that could have been groundbreaking if they had just really rethought what they, in the final analysis, what they wanted the viewer to think and feel. And I think that they got confused along the way. Catherine, you said of course, it is a hardcore prosecution, like this mystery. It's touted as a mystery, but I think that it's suffering from an identity crisis. I think that it's as weak as the prosecutor, who is grasping at straws to see where he can strike, like a viper next, but he himself doesn't have a strong plan. And I think that this movie does kind of fall short, but it could have been amazing because these actors are amazing. The setting is gorgeous. Certainly there's no distractions. This could have been just straight up fantastic screenplay with an amazing cast that are already performing at peak level. They missed out on a real opportunity there, but I think that they still might get an award, as the award season goes on, with the BAFTAs and perhaps even a SAG award here and there. What do you think, Catherine? Do you think they're in line to win any more awards? I believe they did get a Golden Globe.
Yeah, they got for original screenplay and then the actress, I believe, or no, not actress. Or did they? No, they were nominated for that. But yeah, original screenplay. I think it got. I can't. I've watched a couple award shows, but I know it won two of them at one of them, which the director showed up to. I think she won screenplay and directing or so. I can't remember, but I'm not sure exactly. I mean, obviously, the European audiences loved it, so it might have a bigger shot at the BAFTAs. But I agree with you; they should have rethought what this movie's trying to be. Because even in real life, when it comes to actual court cases, like I understand that there's obviously not a smoking gun in every case, clearly, but I'm not a fan of like when you bring in a barrage of character witnesses that just drags out. Because like it doesn't matter how great of a person is, it doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing something evil and hiding it from other people. And I like focusing on things like evidence. It's like, great, you told me of all these character witnesses telling me who they are, but do you have any evidence about the event in question on the day in question? It's like, and that's the same thing with this. It's like, you got nothing. And so I think you're right. I think if they had just told you that, yes, the husband was suicidal, because again, just him being suicidal doesn't mean that this was necessarily a suicide. And that I think would have added more layers to it, because you could still have that social commentary of the reality that the prosecution is only pushing this because they don't like her because, oh, you're an outsider, all this kind of stuff, and made it more compelling. But we'll see if it gets more, because I know her performance also in The Zone of Interest was hailed as being pretty good as well. So I'll be interested to see that, to figure out if, did they not, which performance he nominated for. So, but it was good. I hadn't heard of Sandra Huller before, so I'll certainly be looking out for her other films now. So that's a plus.
I certainly agree. And, a final note on it where you'd mentioned, of course, we both already know how they were not sympathetic to the fact that her French was not strong enough, especially in court. She doesn't want to get any words wrong. And certainly she had to rely on, I'm sure this woman probably speaks 5 languages, but French was not her strongest language. And yet, even though she's kind of scraping by, she couldn't do it. I thought that was very funny in a sense, because that's obviously one of those defendants that needs even more help, but they were kind of pushing back against her because they were happy she was in this compromising position. So, I certainly think that point came across, and, you know, countered against this other film that you and I are going to talk about called American Fiction. Certainly another movie, Catherine, about a writer who certainly has this crisis, if you will. He's obviously a talented writer and professor, but he seems to clash with everyone. And even with all the talent in the world, Catherine, nobody could get as many chances as this guy seems to have gotten with not just family, but even the faculty. I mean, they're not saying they're going to fire this guy, but certainly he, even with a warning, he just does not care. And I think that there is something to be said for at least making peace with your boss. What do you think about the crankiness of this character, which was so skillfully played by this actor who's amazing? It's Jeffrey Wright, right? Is it Jeffrey Wright? Okay. And I just want to make sure is the correct actor. He's stunning in this film. He can carry a film. He's a good leading man.
Sure.
Um, and certainly we have a character who it feels quite righteous and feels like he certainly has an incredible amount of integrity, but I also think he's very judgmental of those around him, and finds that not only do they not live up to his standards of integrity, but he really is very angry about all this. Um, do you think that this character has lost the meaning of trying to just even work with those around him? Nobody's going to live up to your expectations. He has some pretty high expectations, Catherine. What do you think?
I was all there for it in the beginning. I didn't think there was anything wrong with him. Like when the student is saying, I don't think you should have that written on the board. And he's like, I got over it. I'm like, of course you did. And so I didn't think, even when he's when they call him into the office and they're talking to him and I love the pushback that he's giving him. I'm like, yeah, I'm all there for it. This guy's awesome. He's right. And it's funny that you mentioned it, because I should have thought of it earlier. But this movie reminded me kind of like Dream Scenario, where you have the same thing where the author who hadn't published anything for 20 years was a teacher, was like, people are too soft these days. Why are people so whining? It? Oh, we need a safe environment at this school, which is what the Jeffrey Wright's character, what Monk's bosses are telling him at school. And you had the same thing in Dream Star. We need a safe environment. And it's funny because both those films were marketed as like very unique comedies, but end up being really good family dramas. And they thought, oh, that's kind of neat, like a 2-for-1 kind of thing. So I was totally there with Monk being, frustrated by this. And so when he walks in, because like his struggle, as we see in the film, is that he's an author, but he doesn't write African American studies. He writes novels, and you have the scene where he goes into the library and picks up all of his books that have been put under African American studies and puts them in the the fiction section, and the guy's like, I'm just going to put them back when you leave. And he's like, he's like, dude, the idea that the satire on the whole publishing industry is great. How they just eat up this ridiculous thing that he's written. How he says, what, I'm going to stick it to them by writing this trash that nobody's going to want to read. And yet, because like it was a great scene when like this scene right here, when he goes is at the book festival, which is where his bosses have passed him off to for punishment, and she's reading from it. And at first in the trailer, when you see this scene, I thought she's being 100% serious and into it when she's smiling, and then the twist comes later in the movie when she's like, well, look, I know that my primary audience are like white people from the Hamptons, and it's like, so what? If it's there, why not cash in on that gravy train? And she's like, hey, I did a lot of research for my book, which is a big surprise because, like, like the movie's clearly gearing you to side with Monk when you hear her give that reading. Like, come on, this is such ridiculous pandering stuff. So once you find out that no, she actually did do a lot of research to represent underrepresented voices, but when she gave that excuse that, well, it's not, hey, I have no shame doing this because it's not my fault if some white people, take the wrong message from this and start stereotyping. And I'm thinking, well, number one, it won't be just white people. All sorts of people are going to read things like that because Monk's whole beef is that, how many more stories of negative Black stereotypes do we need in society? And that's why the movie as a whole is kind of breaking the fourth wall, because his whole family drama story is not stereotypical. So it's a really great family drama. And so when she's like, oh, well, so what? Just because I wrote a book, it's not my fault if they want to stereotype it. And I'm thinking, I feel that's the same answer that D.W. Griffith would give if somebody sat him down after Birth of a Nation came out and said, you know what, this can give people the wrong idea. And whole generations and generations of filmmakers from the early 20th century would say the same thing with all the racism in their films. That, well, it's not my fault if it's just one movie. But if you snowball that effect, oh, it's just one movie or it's just one book, blah, blah, blah. And so when she kind of gives that as the excuse, oh, I'm not ashamed, but I kind of felt like, that's kind of a little icky, and they never revisit that idea in the movie. So I was really looking forward to what Santara, the author's name there, what she was going to say when she found out that Monk actually wrote this My Pathology, and they don't give us that in the end because they subvert the expectation by doing something different. And I thought, oh, I would have been interested to hear what she would have said because I was really interested in that conversation. Because you see that Monk is obviously very judgmental and has a big fight with his girlfriend and insulting her just for even reading the book, and how his publisher is so great. He's all for it. And why don't you live up and Stagger Lee from the blues song and the old legend? I'm like, that is great. And it's just too perfect. And now he deliberately tries to sabotage the interview, but I'm going to change the title of this book to fuck, thinking they won't go along with it. And the publisher's like, well, I like money, so we're going to go with this. And his own agent is like, yeah, I like money too, so stop arguing about it, And yeah. I like, in a sense, how they sort of subvert expectations when you're seeing all the problems that he has at home, trying to the finances because he needs to care for the mother and stuff like that. Like, okay, so you can see that he's going to write this book because he needs money, but it turns out that's not why he wrote it. It's like he wrote it thinking that nobody would ever pick it up, but then they do. But since it solves all his money problems, he goes along with it anyway. And it's like the whole movie seems to be built on this rising tension of, oh gosh, what's going to happen when they all find out that this is what he did to get the money? Like, what are they going to think about this? And it never really gives you that. And you have, the scene where he pretends to be a fugitive and when he goes to meet the producer. And so at the end of the movie, when he goes to accept the award, and initially people are confused as to why he's accepting it, and you think this is where he's finally going to unload, and it cuts to Hollywood, and the producer's looking at, and it's like, and for a second I thought, wait a minute, was the whole movie a pitch? Yeah. And then you realize, well, no, because you see the chair sitting next to the director and it says Plantation Annihilation, which is the movie he mentioned earlier that he was working on. So I guess it was only that final award scene, which was the pitch for how to end it. And I thought, well, at least it's nice that the producer's cool with the fact that he obviously came clean to him that, yeah, I'm not actually this guy. But when the producer's like, yeah, I don't really like that ending where he's going to say this, why don't we change it? The hystericalness of, the cops running in and like, oh, he's got a gun when he's holding a transparent brick and getting shot. It's too funny. But when he walks out of the studio, the camera makes a point of showing that his brother, who had a lot of money troubles and everything, and has a great character arc of his own, is driving like a new red BMW. So clearly Monk told his brother, because they have that nice touching scene earlier in the movie where the brother's like, I was a closeted gay man for a long time, and our mother is, prejudiced against that, and I never shared that with my father. And he's like, Monk, you need to let people love all of you. You always seem like a curmudgeon, like you have something wrapped up. And of course, his brother doesn't know that the thing he has wrapped up inside him is that he's really frustrated with the fact that there's all these stereotypical narratives out there. So I would have liked to see the scene where he comes clean to his brother and tells him, hey, I wrote the book. Like, I wrote this thing. Because obviously, again, his brother knows by the end of the film, 'cause he's driving that nice red BMW. And he's thinking, well, what'd they say? And he's like, they love it. They want to go with it. And he laughs. He's like, yes, cha-ching, as they drive off. And I get that's funny and kind of meta. Like, they have the early scene when he's sitting behind the desk trying to write My Pathology, and you have the Keith David and the other actor.
I love that scene,
Catherine. Yeah, that stuff, that's great. And that's how they kind of revisited at the end there. But I still felt like there was something missing. Like, he tells the producer at the end that my girlfriend still won't return my calls. And I'm thinking, is that because of the earlier argument where you insulted her for reading the book, or have you since told her that you wrote this and now she really hates you? It's like, well, we don't know. And again, because he had that conversation with Centaura there where she's like, well, I think the book's really pandering and all that, and he likes that she's saying that. And he's like, well, I thought that was a lot like yours. And when she gives her justification for it and this kind of thing, I was really wondering what she was going to think if he got up on that stage and just unloaded. Like, would she think that, oh man, this guy's really struggling with this? Or would she be really upset with him? And again, I wanted them to further have that conversation because you could tell Monk was kind of bothered when she's like, well, so what if somebody gets the wrong idea or stereotypes it because of my one book? It's just one book. I'm like, I remember taking classes about this in college that you can't use that. Well, it's just one movie type excuse, and yet she's doing the same thing, and it's like, I just felt like that was a really neat idea, like socially, that I wanted the movie to kind of revisit because, yeah, the drama and the family drama is really good. The satire is really biting and really funny. Jeffrey Wright is excellent in the lead role. But once they start hitting the core of some of these issues, I really wanted them to embrace that more, and then they kind of don't. And so I felt like, oh, a little bit let down with how the ending went, but I still thought it was a pretty good movie.
Yeah, and I think, Catherine, I gotta agree with you about the ending, about kind of like they dropped the ball in a sense, because I know what they were thinking, and I think you might agree with this, although I'm not sure. And I want to say hello to Luminara, Queen of Figure Flex Friday. Hey, Luminara. Also want to say hello to Daniel Berry, Sports Highlights. Hope you are well, Daniel. And also Ernesto Gonzalez. Hello, Ernesto. Hope you're well. Catherine, I think they didn't want to make a cliche ending, but with such a funny film, with so many perfectly toned beats, with so many funny comedy moments, I think they could have completely avoided a cliche ending in the sense, because this character, he's a researcher almost, and we don't really get a sense that he has students who are under him doing projects or anything like that. But what he's really looking at is he's kind of curious as to whether works like this really damaged reputations. He's very concerned about this. And, even after getting a paycheck for everything, this seems to be at the heart and soul of him, why he stayed away from things like this. It would have been interesting for him to continue and say, you know what, I'm going to just, write what the public wants, like what Centaura says, and see where this takes me as a person, which we kind of saw in the end. Or he could have gone ahead and said, after looking at the behavior, after observing people's behavior to this, I came to the conclusion myself that this is not the path I want to continue. I wrote this one book. I wrote it. I admit it. I benefited from this. But I personally feel that it wasn't good for my soul or something. There could have been this awakening, discovery, where he realizes that as this talented writer, he can write anything he wants and write it at the drop of a hat and write bestsellers, but realize that the most important thing to him is what makes him happy. And I think he was a very unhappy person, even writing the most ethical books and things of this nature. He needed to have love in his life. That was another element that was missing. The words on the page weren't the things that were going to make him happy, Catherine. Yes, he was writing books that he loved and enjoyed, but he needed love too. And the notion that being a successful writer was going to mean he was going to be happy, perhaps was his mistake in a sense. Even when he had all the money and the even had to lie about being this other writer, when he didn't have his girlfriend, boy, he was unhappy. I think he learned from his brother, who suddenly was able to love freely and maybe be a little naughty, that opening up and allowing himself to open up means everything. And if anything, Catherine, when his sister died, that should have been the clue that he needed to make sure that if he needs to have relationships that last, relationships where he can be close and have intimacy with another person, even just as a friend. He was very kind of, you know, standoffish to his sister, who took on a huge responsibility. He's a hard working person. It's almost as if he felt he was better than her in a sense, Catherine. Almost as if what he was doing for a living was, more of a, dedicated kind of what I love kind of job, and what she was doing, yeah, she's okay. you know, it was very odd how he kind of put his own self on this pedestal. And I think the realization is that it's very lonely on that pedestal. What do you think, Catherine? What do you think?
Well, yeah, like he mentions all his family were doctors. Like even his brother was a doctor, and he's like he didn't want to do what he thought was the very rote expected thing. He wanted to do something different. And I didn't think it was so much that he wanted to be a bestseller for the sake, like he thought it would solve his problems. I think he was just frustrated that the fact that his own agent and their publishers, who've been publishing his stuff forever, still doesn't even care to make sure it's put in like categorized properly. Like, oh, we're just gonna throw in African American studies because oh you're black, so we'll just do that. And he's like, well, I'm writing stories which he feels are important to him, which are probably inspired by his actual life experiences, which aren't as stereotypical as the stuff that was selling. And you could tell it frustrates him. It wasn't simply it wasn't just a petty jealousy thing. It was that he wants to promote positive black stories, and the fact that his publishers weren't interested in that, and that other people didn't seem to be interested in that, like the readers out there. And that was like, you could tell that really bothered him. And that's why he wrote, because he wrote it in anger. Like he didn't think that my pathology was going to be embraced. He thought it was going to be rejected, and that they would get the joke. Like, oh, this is the kind of trash you like? Well, he's like, he's flipping the bird to them. So he was shocked when they actually go along with it and it becomes this ridiculous satire. But you're right, he does still need relationships. Like his brother says, I could tell there's something else there. You need to let them love all of you, not just like you're not just defined by your career or your career success. Like what else are you defined by here? And yes, there's the practicality that he needs to get like a bestseller because he needs to help his mom because she's got dementia and or Alzheimer's or whatnot. But yeah, I thought that that's another thing I wanted the movie to pursue, because again, you could tell he is genuinely bothered that people are more interested in reading, the type of stuff that Santara wrote, not because they want to connect with the story, because she says I'm writing about underrepresented voices, but the people who are reading her book aren't interested in lifting those voices so much as they are in getting a laugh out of it, because they think, oh, this is like they're reacting in the same way the white publishers do to my pathology, right? And he wants to do something more meaningful, not for the sake of being on a hoity-toity pedestal, but because he's like, doesn't anybody care about reality anymore, or telling good stories? Like, for instance, do we need the umpteenth slavery narrative or something like that? And he wants to, and so I get why he's really frustrated by that. And I thought that was something else the movie was gonna, as a greater conversation, work its way back around to, but it really doesn't, because at the end he's still now writing the script apparently for the film adaptation and is still frustrated. It's like, yeah, they play it for laughs, but the fact that he's still surprised when he walks out of the film studio at the end of the movie that they were willing to accept it. Because again, him trying to change whatever the ending that he pitched to the producer is like, the one that the producer rejects is another attempt for Monk to self-sabotage the project, because he still doesn't really, it's like, you got your money out of it, you still don't really want this to succeed on a pop culture level. But his brother doesn't care, because his brother has the same attitude that Santara does. It's like, hey, if it sells and this is your corner and you're doing it, then yeah, let's keep making it, what's the shame? But in a sense, like, yeah, he's happier in a bit in the end, because he doesn't, well, I mean, he doesn't get back together with his girlfriend, or he hasn't gotten back together at the time at the end of the film, but he's certainly come closer with his brother. But it feels almost unfinished, because he still hasn't found that piece that he's been looking for yet. So it feels like there's, in a sense, more of the story to tell. Like, and it doesn't really end.
I think it would have been interesting to maybe even see him with a kid, a child. Or and then we would have assumed, let's say, or seen his wife or girlfriend, whatever they end up doing, starting a family of his own, and having that experience where he clearly is kind of lacking in some of that, those areas. And I have to admit, I laughed a lot in this film. I enjoyed watching this. It reminded me of another film called Boombazzled, which you've probably heard of. And it was about these guys who had a show on television, and they wanted them, there were two African-American men who had a show on television, and they wanted them to do a minstrel show. And they're like, we can't do this. This is the most offensive, disgusting thing in the world. But they do it, and it ends up being like a #1 show on television. And I think kind of exploring these ideas, or at least the notion of what is it exactly,
like the plot of the producers.
Yes, very much on the order of the producers. Springtime in Germany kind of situation. And I think that what made this film work was Jeffrey Wright and the cast of actors in it, which was fantastic. Issa Rae is wonderful as she has this candid conversation with him in the lunchroom, which was kind of refreshing because I personally didn't like how she presented herself. And then when I found out that she did research to make the book, her approach to it, had a different thing. And I think that she wanted, as you said, she wanted to go ahead and say, I'm representing unrepresented voices or stories, and he was doing it for the sake of saying, I bet you I could do this, and it as an experiment. And so if he's going ahead and saying that he's doing an experiment, go ahead and make it like a full professor thing. It's a research thing. I think if we had at least gotten a research angle, and then later on he publishes something that is quite profound from that, it would have been for more than, let's say, if it's a shallow notion of just saying you're doing it for money. Now I'm doing it for research purposes. Oh, now you've even added another layer, which makes sense. He's a professor now. He always was. So professors do research, and when they're writing books and stuff. It would have been interesting if this could have been a research project. At least it's the research part of my mind of it, Catherine. One of the other things that I was going to say about this film, I think Jeffrey Wright needs to have more films where he is the leading man. I think, we have, and I guess this is more pictures of the director. It was wonderful to see what he can do with any role. And I haven't really seen him perform badly. I think that the cast was very interesting as well. There was also, I can't read this now. And
That was a great scene right there that you have queued up on the video.
Yes. Is this the scene where he's looking for his mother? Or is
So that's the
this
scene where they're the funeral for the sister.
Oh,
And the
yes.
neighbor walks by and starts
Oh,
asking if they have a permit for it. I'm like, and they're like, nobody likes you, Phil. Get out of here, Phil. Screw you, Phil. I was like, that was
it was really interesting how much, this wherever they are in Massachusetts is a beautiful place. They have a beautiful home. And a lot of their life circles around this beautiful place, this experience. And certainly, like there's a wedding that takes place on this beach as well, Catherine. His mother gets lost, once or twice on the beach, and she would have, thank goodness he went out there and saved her. But I think it is really interesting that they chose to put the situation where he's caring for his mother. There are people who find themselves in this situation, especially his age group that he's in, where this does come up quite often, and they wanted that to be there. But I think that the if we're looking at American fiction from this story of this person's life, I think it is an interesting story. I think overall this is an interesting movie. It's an interesting story. They dropped the ball at the end. I agree. I think it could have been a much stronger ending. And as I said, I think they were trying to avoid that cliche moment where he says, "Okay, I realize that it's kind of like this soliloquy thing." But I think that the writers who wrote this comedy were smarter than that anyway. And I'm sure they've had multiple endings. Maybe that's why at the end of the film, there are like these multiple endings, right? Where you're like, oh, they didn't go with this one. Oh, they didn't go with that one. And I think that the sense of indecisiveness, those might have been their top 5 or top 3, and they did the top 3 by including them as if they were happening in each part. And they say, oh, you like this one better? Okay. Oh, you like this one better? Without having to make the decision themselves, with the pressure of having to make a final decision, perhaps they couldn't. And I think that is unfortunate, because the film doesn't feel as if it has that climactic moment. You actually get to the climax, but there's no release. You get
right,
there.
he's still, in a sense, he's still unresolved about it, because again, he's trying to sabotage the movie adaptation. So it's like the conspiracy or whatever you will, it's still going, and he's still unsatisfied about it. But now his brother apparently knows and doesn't care. He's like, yeah, let's ride this gravy train, basically. And he's still kind of, it's like, yeah, his girlfriend hasn't called him back, and he's still kind of just, man, I can't believe that. So it's, in a sense, it feels like there's more, or there's something missing, or there's something more to tell from his story.
There is something more. And certainly I think they could probably make an American fiction too if they played their cards right. I could see a follow-up film to this. And what I would like to see happen is for there to be that interaction with this character and Centaura again, in some way, because he needed to see another person's perspective of what this material means. And while it is true that a lot of it, is perceived, once people read that, they have very negative opinions. While that is true, I think that the character did need to see that there are other people who are looking at this material in a different way. So, is this film about sensationalism of stereotypes? Yes. Do we see stereotypes in this film? Yes. Is it meant to make you laugh? Yes. But I think that the reason why you even go through the film is because Jeffrey Wright hooks you on this character that is really interesting. This man is just compelling. How funny is it, Catherine, when he does make up the story about his background as this author? Were you surprised? I was surprised that he went so far as to say he was a fugitive or something. I was surprised he said that. And when he got on the phone with the publishers, they were surprised at how he sounded. Oh, you sound like a normal person. And his friend is like, come on, man, come on, come on, um, trying to make this work out for both of them. But I think that they wanted to make you laugh. They wanted to make people have a laugh. I think you do leave this movie laughing and entertained, but it is kind of cut short. But Jeffrey Wright's performance, um, did he get the Golden Globe for this performance, Catherine? I don't remember. Did he win anything?
No, he was nominated, I think. I
Mhm.
think he was nominated because I haven't been keeping us track, but
Yeah, either.
no, I think Cillian Murphy won the Globe for that. But I think it's I've always been a fan of Jeffrey Wright. It took a long time for finally giving him a leading role, so I hope he gets a lot more of them. He certainly has the star power for that. For this not to just be a one-off. It's like, no, let him have more leading roles, please. Because you're right, he's what hooks you into this story. So good.
Yes, absolutely. And I think anybody who's watching this, I would recommend watching both films and, of course, making your own conclusions about them. Catherine, I've had so much fun talking about these two films, which certainly have had a lot of chatter about them, especially Anatomy of a Fall, as we talked about earlier, and American Fiction. I think that, who knows what will happen later on with that film. They may do something else with the film, and we
Oh, I
might
still give it a 4 out of 5 for that one for American Fiction.
Yeah, I agree with the 4 out of 5 as well. I think that it is just really pure entertainment and certainly makes you laugh. And the chemistry of that cast is incredible. Certainly, I love the comedic parts of it where they're like, "What do you want us to name this?" And it just so many funny moments that are enjoyable to watch. That panel, Catherine, where his own book is being nominated for the award is great. And even though it was predictable that it would be nominated and win, I'm willing to forgive that because I was enjoying the film so much. And I think that that says a lot when compared to Anatomy of a Fall, where there were some things where I'm like, no, I don't think so. No, I'm not buying that. Very interesting contrast for me, at least between the two films. Catherine, what are your final thoughts on either film um,
Well,
tonight?
I like American Fiction a lot more than Anatomy of a Fall. I think it is a very unique concept, a bit of a great bait and switch that they market it as like this ridiculous comedy, but you do have a great family drama to go along with it. Same that you had with Dream Scenario. Uh, and Anatomy of a Fall, all three of them are about writers or people working in college, stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, so I think I'll definitely be revisiting American Fiction. That was a very good film.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that analysis, Catherine. And I do want to say hello to Miss Martin Muses, who's here. Hi, Miss Martin Muses. We're just about wrapping up our review of Anatomy of a Fall and American Fiction. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me at Slice Night at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. You can find me on the Fantasmagorium Show YouTube channel every Thursday night. We got a playlist for all sorts of movie reviews, the Tarantino Rodriguez film reviews, the Bond film reviews, the Batman, Spider-Man. Right now we're doing the Fargo reviews. Those are fun for the TV show. We're on season 4. And you can find me on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific with The Unifying Force, which is a Star Wars philosophy talk show. So that's really fun too.
That is fantastic, guys. Please do check out Catherine at all those locations. I've got them on the thumbnail as well.
And
Guys,
Letterboxd, that's right. Slice Night at Letterboxd as well.
All right. Uh, Certainly do check out Catherine at all of those things. Guys, please, thank you for being here. If you're watching on the Burnettwork, please like and subscribe to the Burnettwork, as well as if you're watching on Positive Fandom, please like and subscribe to Positive Fandom. And guys, I do have a new channel, Roman Empire Matters, as well. I've got my Roman Empire Matters podcast and reviews of all the things we like in Roman Empire and entertainment. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight, and certainly do enjoy the support from you all. This has been so much fun. Catherine and I will be back reviewing more films before many of the award ceremonies continue this season. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care, everybody.